Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on this wonderful, warm yet cloudy weathered day. I know it's summertime, so I appreciate everyone being here. And thank you, Norm and Kelly, for having Intrinium come out to do this presentation. Really appreciate it, and really happy to have the opportunity to talk about cybersecurity for business with everybody here. So really quick, let's set the stage of what the world is and what it looks like right now. Unfortunately, the fact of the matter is, the world of the internet is no longer computers, phones, and printers, right? We all know that, right? IoT, Internet of Things, if you want the actual definition, the internetworking of physical devices, vehicles, buildings, so on and so forth, things that are enabled to collect and communicate data. Things are continuing on a very rapid process or progress to be connected to the internet. Refrigerators. Have you guys seen this? This is kind of cool, I thought. Smart TVs, that's not too bad. That's not terribly new. Watches, smart watches, buzzing your phone always, making sure you get your text messages. Healthcare appliances, healthcare applications, and devices are becoming more and more connected to the internet every day for whatever. Someone thought it was a good idea to put health information on the internet. I'm not quite sure about that one, though. Cars, Tesla is trying to get the smart car to drive itself and to be connected to the internet and be able to get its updates and firmware updates on the real time. Light bulbs, Hue light bulbs. Does anybody have Hues? I love Hues. I think they're so cool. But they're connected to the internet, and they are causing problems to some people. And it's right in your home, baby monitors. You can access cameras nowadays straight from your phone. I have one to watch my puppies. I don't have kids, but you know what? I don't know that I feel very comfortable having my camera exposed to the internet. And a lot of this is driven by convenience. It's convenient to be able to look at, a camera on your phone while you're away and make sure things are going well. It's convenient to be able to have your fridge tell you when and where you need to go shopping, if you need milk or if you need eggs or whatever. Unfortunately, this convenience is not always just for you. I love this stock photo. The hackers, too, are using these technologies in order to infiltrate and really gain a hold on your lives. I shouldn't say that. They aren't right now, but they could be. And I've got a great example to talk about that later. So let's talk about our roadmap. So really briefly, I have a couple examples of who the hackers are, what they do, just some examples that you've probably seen in the news recently. And to close it all off, just how do you protect yourself, your businesses, so on and so forth. Really briefly, my name's Kylie Martonik. I am the Senior Information Security Consultant with Intrinium. Intrinium is as Norm introduced, a IT consulting firm. We mostly focus on security-focused solutions. So that means information security consulting, managed security and IT services, large-scale infrastructure projects, right down to C-level consulting as needed. Myself, I've been with Intrinium for about 5 years. I'm a pen tester. I like to call myself the friendly auditor. And I'm typically the first person that actually arrives on site if an incident does occur, such as a breach or some kind of ransomware infection. By night, I also run a local information security group. It's called DC 509, very casual. We talk about everything that's going on in the world. I'm a tinkerer. I like hardware. I've been trying to learn hardware. That's probably the one area of computers that I don't know that well. And overall, I'm a nerd. Comics, action figures, you name it. I've probably done it. I play way too many video games in my off time. Okay, so why do hackers hack? This is a great question. Does anybody want to answer this?
The challenge.
Okay, that's a good one. Challenge is great, being able to say I did it. Any other? Profit, yes, it's lucrative, can have high reward. Anybody else?
Hard to get caught.
Correct. Pretty much lays out a lot of the things of why hackers hack. I always like to bring up this image because I think it shows a good map of what a hacker can use a compromised system for. You can see we have about 8 different avenues to use a PC, and then on that, there's about 5 different ways that it can also use it. And I think, in my honest opinion, notoriety, fame, those are all great reasons. Making a statement is also a great reason. You know, we have all these movements, anonymous, these hacktivist groups. They want to make sure their message is heard, so you better watch out. Some people like to watch the world burn. Again, not really sure why. And then, in my opinion, I think, though, it's mostly money-driven because one hacked PC, again, you can see down here at the bottom, hostage attacks, financial credentials. Those are going to be your high-value items. Ransomware fits into this category. You know, getting banking account data, making those wire transfers, as Norm mentioned. That is going to be the goods of what they're aiming for. So, who's the target? I like this question. Obviously, businesses, brick and mortar shops, just as well as e-commerce is as much as of a target. Fortune 500 is a small business. You know, they want your credit card data. They want your company secrets. Credit card data is easy to sell quick. Company secrets are, your competitor wants those, and you know it, right? Healthcare, also a big target right now. I'm sure you've seen all the hospitals being taken down by ransomware. And really, you know, medical records, if you can exfiltrate those out of a network, easy to sell, easy to move, and highly profitable. What else? Politics and movements. Again, back to that anonymous bit. They use hacking as their platform to tell you what they think and what they don't think. Did everybody see that they announced the other day that NASA had found alien life, and NASA was like, no? Yeah, so they're not always correct. And they also sometimes use it as a soapbox as well as to disrupt other people's movements too. Government. Again, we hear nation-state actors all the time in the news nowadays. We have China, Russia. If you want to believe it or not, you know, there are nations out there that want our secrets and want to know what we're doing. And honestly, you, me, anybody willing to pay is a target. I think that is an important notion to hit, especially with the recent ransomware event that just happened even yesterday. You get a piece of ransomware, your stuff gets locked up, those family photos you have, how much are they worth it to you to pay for to get them back? I think that's an important point to hit just because ransomware is the biggest evolving threat right now that I'm seeing, and the stuff recently kind of solidified my predictions. So how did we get here? 10 years ago, it wasn't quite like this, right? Well, everything is commoditized. So this is a somewhat dated screenshot, but what you're looking at right now is actually a marketplace to buy frauded credit cards. Yes, you are looking at a Visa debit card. It's a Premier mark, whatever that means. And you can buy that card for $22.40. Everything is commoditized. It's cheap to buy. It's easy to get away with. And it's not only your credit card numbers and your records. Access. You can see here we have at the top, there's 1,000 non-verified Hotmail accounts for sale for $6. Again, it's easy, it's commoditized, and everything that you potentially have on the internet, it might as well be commoditized as well. So you can see that it's escalating more and more to get easier to buy these things, get this access, infiltrate a business without very little technical effort, to be honest.
Why do they want to use email accounts?
So you could use an email account or a batch of them. Say you buy 6,000 Yahoo accounts. You could use those email accounts to basically push spam out and attempt to phish other people and thus grab more credentials and thus grab more data or get sensitive data and so on and so forth. That's one example. You could use it to point all of those 6,000 email accounts at your enemy that you have and you just don't like and say, I'm going to spam their inbox with so much stuff that they won't be able to get any work done. There's a lot of different uses you can use for these. And there's going to be a lot of private data in these as well, right? I use email to communicate with my insurance broker. Do you guys? Right? There's going to be sensitive data in those emails typically. Email is just so accessible and so easy to communicate back and forth. Sometimes we forget that maybe that's not a good idea, or maybe we should make sure and delete that and erase that from our email box. Does that answer your question? Awesome. Any other questions? Great. So let's talk about some examples. Anybody familiar with the Mirai botnet? Okay, that's fine. So what you're looking at here is called a botnet, and every blue dot that you see is actually a compromised device in the world. So you remember that PC that we talked about at the beginning that had all these opportunities to be used by a hacker? This is one of those instances that they're using it for. And I'll get into what a botnet is in just a moment. But basically, as you can imagine, this amount of systems, and it's kind of been dumbed down just a little bit because you can't quite get all the data on there, was combined and used to target reporters, service providers, so on and so forth, and actually managed to, I think it was back in fall, take down a service provider, a major service provider who does website protection and so on and so forth, just because someone out there thought, this one website that's on this service shouldn't be up and I need to take it down. This was back in fall of 2016. And that's pretty critical to have it's called a denial of service attack, to have someone just be able to say, I want to take down this business, or I want to make sure that they can't do anything and halt business completely. That's pretty significant, and that's a pretty significant threat, I think, especially with as connected everybody is on the network or on the internet. So let's look at a botnet. So the Mirai botnet, basically, it actually scanned the internet. It had an automated scanner. It was looking very specifically for those IoT devices we were talking about, very specifically looking for those kinds of devices, seeing what's exposed to the internet. And then if it did find it, what's great about IoT devices is they have these default things called default passwords. And you can go find them online and you can go harvest them online. And basically, if it found an IoT device out there on the internet, it would try to log in with this default password. And if it worked, it would infect the device and basically sit and await instruction. So the instruction is going to come from the bot master up top here. You can see they're basically slaves to that one device or however many command and control devices are out there. But these kinds of botnets and these kinds of attacks are available to rent out on the darknet. You can go out there and you can say, hey, I need to take down whatever. I need to send this much data. How much is that going to be? And someone will provide you access so you can do that. So when we're talking about IoT becoming more prevalent and everything else, I mean, in reality, little human interaction was needed here. There's an automated scanner. It automatically tries to log in and infect the device. And if you reset that device and you don't change that password, it'll probably be infected in about, I believe it was 6 minutes was the last one I heard. Yeah. So learning lesson here, passwords. Default passwords are the bane of, well, everybody's existence. That is the first thing I go for if I'm trying to test an environment and see if I can get access into places. So changing passwords from the default, no matter what kind of devices it is, if you think it's harmless, if camera is just sitting out there, just change it. Be safe rather than sorry. Making sure devices that don't need to be exposed to the internet aren't. I think that's an important one. Some people forget that. They just kind of plug it into the router and say that's fine. Well, sometimes that means you can access it from the outside too, which is how, again, that botnet was able to log in and attempt to infect those devices. And if you're not using it, turn it off. I mean, that could be a device, that could be a service, whatever. If it's just best practice to just, if it's off, you can feel pretty safe that it's not going to be messed with. So let's look at a different example. David Kernel. This was the kid that hacked into Sarah Palin's email account. And I use hack lightly because when you see how he did it, I think you'll kind of agree it's like, not really a hack, but that's what they called it. So David Kernel, his name was Rubico on the internet, was a 20-year-old economics student who just didn't agree with Sarah Palin running for the campaign or whatever was going at the time. So he decided to see if he could do anything about it. So he decided to go to the internet, check out Sarah Palin's Wikipedia, found that she was born 1964, eloped with a high school sweetheart. You'd kind of expect this kind of information out there on someone who's a little more famous, right? Where she attended high school and the zip code she lives in. Altogether seems fairly harmless until you realize that those were her password reset questions, and all he had to do was plug in that data, get that password reset email to go to a different email address, and he could change her password, and log in. Stupid simple. Stupid simple. Again, that's kind of why I use hack lightly, but I think it's a great case of being aware of what's going on and what is out there about yourself on the internet, because it can have some serious consequences, as we saw. So what did we learn, or what did Sarah Palin learn? Well, she should probably not have those basic secure password reset questions on her accounts. Ideally, password reset questions are going to be treated like passwords, right? You're not going to be blasting them out to social media or Twitter or whatever, where someone can find them. Treat social media like a microphone. In Sarah Palin's case, it wasn't necessarily social media, but I think it's important for just private citizens to understand, even if you do have your privacy settings set right and it's all locked down, there's still potential for it to get out to somewhere. And on that privacy note, it's important on a very periodic basis to go through your social media settings, Facebook, Twitter, whatever you use. Make sure it's set in the way that you want it to. Those privacy settings always seem to change when they update it, and it drives me bonkers. But just keeping in check, knowing what you're allowing out to the internet and what you're keeping private is very important. And I think another helpful lesson here would have been if Sarah Palin would have Googled herself every once in a while, she would have known what was out there and what not to use in her secret answers, right? So I recommend Googling yourself. It's great. You can Google me, like Norm said. You'll find all my cross-country results from high school. But yeah, just making sure you know what's out there about yourself, and if you don't want that out there, handling it and taking it down as needed. And there's a bunch of resources to help you do that, of course. All right, my last email. We're going to go to the other side of the aisle here. So John Podesta, Clinton's campaign chairman. I'm sure we have heard this story endlessly about the Democratic DNC's emails getting leaked. Unfortunately, he was the one that got picked for the fish on this one, and he was the one that kind of fell for it. We'll walk through that whole process. Is everybody familiar with what phishing is? Feel pretty comfortable? I don't need to define it. Awesome. Okay. So John Podesta received this email to his Gmail. How many of you would have looked at it and be like, oh, shoot, Ukraine? I mean, right? It startles you. It looks legitimate. It has everything that you would kind of expect. The colors of Google, the poppy colors, and just, the best, the Gmail team, whatever. This was the phishing email that he and a handful of other, I believe, staffers were targeted with. Now, they did the right thing. A staffer actually was suspicious and actually sent that email to their IT guy. Awesome. Cool. They're double checking, they're validating. That's great. Unfortunately, the IT guy meant to respond properly, as I understand the story to go, but purportedly he meant to say this is a illegitimate email versus a legitimate email. Yeah, communication 101, right? But you can see the rest of his email is obviously a little more urgent. He needs to change his password, do two-factor, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, he provides a link and does everything right outside of that one small flub. This would have been immediately dropped. Well, unfortunately, that same staffer who got that reply forwarded the phishing email with the headline of, "This is the real one," that bad Gmail one that came in, "This is the real one," and said, we need to get this changed right now. So instead of forwarding the one with the legitimate link, she forwarded along this change password link. Yeah, you can see communication 101. And if you expanded that link, that short link, you would have noticed that This actually isn't a google.com address. It's a myaccount.google.com-security settings page.ml. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, that kind of wraps up how that happened with John. One more step. If they would have just verified, did one more check on that email address, one more check on that link, that whole situation probably could have been avoided. Or it would have been left to the next one. Who knows? So lessons learned here. Trust but verify, right? We want to make sure we're clicking the right link. You can spoof URL links to look legitimate, but go somewhere else. You can use those short links always get people, where it's the bit.lys. There are services out there that will expand that link for you, so you can go and look and make sure it is legitimate. Never click the link in the email is a good one. I just think that's just good practice nowadays. Everyone is, I actually use that Gmail one that John got. I have used that in phishing campaigns. It's very successful. And you know what? If it looks fishy, it probably is, right? Nowadays, it's getting so hard to spot the fish and the non-phishing emails. It's good to make sure you educate your employees, your family, your friends, and don't forget to talk about the other methods of phishing, right? And we'll get into this a little more, but phone phishing or vishing or SMS phishing, those are all becoming more and more prevalent in the threat landscape. And if something does happen, it's important to have a plan. Plan ahead. What are you going to do? Are you going to go to that computer that you just changed provided that bad password to on that bad web page? Probably not. You should probably go use your friend's computer that's most likely clean to go change your passwords just in case something got on there, right? Know who to contact if you're in business. Make sure you have your IT guy or information security people available and ready to handle those kinds of situations. If they're not capable of handling those situations, make sure you have a firm that can do so, someone that can perform proper instant response and investigation. Sometimes these things, they do require just kind of special handling in order to make sure we get all the details. So we've kind of got a couple good examples of what data criminals are doing. These are very real world examples. You can go look them up. They're all over the internet. News articles have churned them over and over. But I think the takeaway is the criminals want what you have for as little as possible and as quietly as possible. And if you don't think you're a target, I think you'll find out very quickly once those family photos get encrypted how much you're willing to pay. The fact that people think that they're not a target is just not applicable anymore. You just can't think that way. Everything and everyone can be sold. So why do they go for crime? Why do they go digital crime? Why not just go to the local supermarket, quick, jump in, pull some cash, run out, disappear? Well, I think we've heard a handful of these answers around the room, but covering your tracks is very easy over the internet. There's so many different services out there that you can use for either free or very low prices to hide where you actually are on the internet. Both good and bad. Not only bad people use those services. You can be geographically disconnected from the target, right? You can be in China targeting someone very specifically in the US, and at the end of the day, because you're so far away, they can't really track who you are, what you're doing, or try to even bring you in. And again, that kind of wraps up into making it harder for authorities to track you down and bring you to justice, basically. And it's high reward. We've already seen a couple examples of records being sold for nothing. Company secrets are commonly sold on the darknet marketplace. And honestly, if they just have another computer that they can add power to their botnet to, they're going to be happy. So they can use that in other ways to make more money. So really, if you want to think about it, hacking is actually very much like a business, right? Because in a business, you judge and project where you want the market's going to be and where you want to be in there, develop a product or some kind of service to meet that need. You identify the risks, but you continue this cycle of analysis and development and so on and so forth. Hackers do the same thing. We have malware developers, the guys that are the super brainiacs who develop the malware that you see out there on the news every day. We have the hackers that buy that malware to go infect and invade private networks. And then we have the carters or the sellers who basically take the data that's stolen, they flip it on the darknet. And again, and around you goes. So for an example, the Petya ransomware. Did you guys hear about that yesterday? Yeah? Okay. So Petya, the strain that came out yesterday, was a very sophisticated strain of ransomware. Originally, however, the Petya ransomware was actually a ransomware as a service. Kind of going back to that business model. You can go onto the darknet, say, I want to bring this company to a grinding halt and I want them to pay me in order to get their stuff back. You don't have to have any technical training. All you need to go do is download 1 or 2 tools. And it's very difficult to trace. It's very hard to find out who did it, if it was an internal employee or if it was someone, our competitor, or so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, this ransomware and this evolving threat is very high value, because if you can't recover from, say, backups, or you can't recover that data on your own, you're left with 2 options: lose it or pay it to get it back, right? Scary stuff. So let's talk about protecting yourself. Okay. I'm not going to hammer on passwords too much because we hear about passwords all the time and I sometimes think it gets lost in translation. But in reality, passwords are your first line of defense. They should be complex, alphanumeric, capitals, special characters, and they really shouldn't be dictionary words like the ones we see here. So let's take password 1, for example. That was my password that you needed to say if you wanted to get into my blanket fort as a child. So that password, anything with password, is sufficiently burned, doesn't really matter. It's easy to guess. I guarantee you this is the first thing they're going to try. But what about the summer 17? Capital, has 8 characters, has a couple numbers. Again, that's a very, very common schema that people like to build passwords of. Typically, you'll have a 30 to 60 day rotation of passwords. You have to change it every so often. Well, guess what? You're going to think, oh, well, it's spring now, so I guess I'll just change it to spring 17, and that's what it is. You and probably about 10 other people in this room probably do the same thing. I'm sorry. I see this all the time. Big networks, small networks, doesn't matter. It's currently has been burned and is just bad practice now. Gonzaga 123 seems a little more reasonable, not quite as widely known. I generally make it a point, if I'm going to go do a penetration test, to go look and see what the common sports teams, the high school, the college, and whatever, get those into a dictionary list, and I will try to crack that many passwords as much as I can, because people love their sports teams. It's kind of like using your kid as the password nowadays. It's just, unfortunately, bad practice. So let's talk about hard to guess, but easy to remember. We'll run through these really quick. Please don't use these passwords. Don't use them. They're in my password list already. If I find you and you're using them, I'm going to kind of hunt you down. But we can see, and everyone says that using phrases for passwords always is more secure. Why? You don't just have people churning through the fast hits of the dictionary lists and trying to just use those to quickly get access. Mnemonics, again, we'll walk through that one, but that's also a great way to have an easy way to remember your password, but it's still complex and you can't really tell what it is. So I am Iron Man. It's a phrase. Great. I love Iron Man. He's awesome. That password specifically, I plugged it into one of those websites that will tell you how secure your password is. Also, don't use the same password that you plug those into websites. This password would take about 57,000 years to brute force. Not bad. That's a couple lifetimes. Hashtag 7NITDB4TD. The night is darkest before the dawn is where I stole that one from. Thanks, Batman. Again, pretty complex. You probably wouldn't have guessed that just by looking at it, but if you are a nerd like me and you love those kinds of quotes, great password, hard to forget. This one, only about 609 years to crack. Still a couple lifetimes. You're probably still doing all right. And the last one, 2017 is my favorite. Pretty common phrase, but according to my password cracker, it would take question mark number of years to crack. So that's largely due to the length, the numbers, and so on and so forth. That one would be, if you're just using a basic brute forcer, very, very hard to crack. And it's always a good friendly reminder, please don't write these passwords down if you are making complex passwords. If I'm doing a walkthrough of, if I'm on site at a client, I do walkthroughs and I do check under your keyboards for passwords. So do the janitors, and so do those bad actors that are potentially infiltrating networks if they happen to get access. So something to keep in mind is just try not to write down passwords. I often recommend the use of a password manager if you're having a hard time, and they're generally much more convenient nowadays. So what can you do beyond passwords? Anybody not know what two-factor authentication is? Okay. So two-factor authentication adds an extra layer of security to the authentication process to make sure you're allowed to access your stuff. What that means is you pick two of the following: either something you know, like a password, something you have, so like those RSA tokens that have the constantly changing numbers. You can get them as an app on your iPhone now. Or something you are, so fingerprint, retina scans. Two of those combined creates two-factor authentication, which is great. I personally love it, especially when I find someone has actually gotten my password, say, on social media. As soon as they authenticate, I get a text saying, hey, here's your authentication PIN code. Boom, something I have, my token. And that immediately tips me off that someone's trying to get me into my stuff and I need to go change my stuff. Hasn't actually happened to me yet, but spooked me once or twice when I was trying to log into my own stuff. Important to note here, however, two passwords, two things that you know does not equal two-factor authentication. It has to be two of those three things that I just listed. Reviewing access is also a great way to ensure that nothing strange is going on. Gmail, banking, web portals nowadays, they all have available to you an access log to show when the last time you logged in, from where, and gives you the time and some identifying information like what browser you were using. Great to review on the periodic basis, especially if you're concerned that maybe there's an old app out there that you don't use anymore that you connected there up to your bank account and it still has access. Well, that's a hole, right? So you can go in there and remove that access. Now, if you're seeing connections being made from Ukraine, you have a whole different problem. But then you know that there's a problem, you can go and hopefully get ahead of it before it really becomes serious. And of course, don't reuse passwords. I'm going to touch on that just briefly. It just makes it easier. There's bots out there that people create that will basically take your email and that password that they cracked and try to go log into everything. Plain and simple. And if you're reusing passwords, it just makes it that much easier. So again, a password manager is a great solution to that, to make sure that you're using unique passwords as well as storing them securely. LastPass and KeePass are two ones that I have heard very good things about. Okay, so social engineering, we touched on this a little bit. So there's several types of social engineering: in person, by email, which we all are very familiar with by now, and by phone. What's dangerous about social engineering is it bypasses your technical controls. So if you have, like Norm had up on that presentation, your firewall, your antivirus, so on and so forth, doesn't matter. Social engineering will bypass that by invading the human, basically. Because that's the weakest link. People are the weakest link. We naturally are inclined to help people. If you get a call from someone that says, I'm in a server room and I've been here for 12 hours, I really need your password to finish this upgrade, you're going to feel bad. Oh, he's been there for 12 hours. You can hear the fans in the background. Don't buy it. Phone social engineering, it is so easy to spoof the number that a call is coming from. I do it regularly when I'm testing an organization. It's easy to get those applications that make it sound like you're in a server room, for example, or maybe a call center. There's a lot of great tools out there for good and bad to make it seem as convincing as possible. Same with physical or in person. Oftentimes, as soon as I arrive on site at a client, I try to walk in and install a USB or plug in a malicious device. If I'm successful, I will go ahead to the parking lot, log into the Wi-Fi it's broadcasting, and just start my testing from there. It happens. It's pretty crazy on the tools that you can find or even just build for a handful of $5-10 that can do that kind of information and look completely inconspicuous. And of course, by email, we all know those. We get those every day, it seems like nowadays. So of course, be suspicious. Don't trust without reason. I always say, if you're not sure, verify. That could be if someone's just walking around that you don't know, ask for their ID badge or an ID or whoever they're working with, make sure that they're supposed to be there. Make sure they logged in if you've got a log that tracks people that come on site that you don't know. With emails, of course, again, I won't reiterate, check those URLs, make sure that they're valid. And then with phones, I recommend the callback method. If Sarah from Cisco calls you saying, hey, I need you to help me with whatever, don't just be like, yeah, sure. Go look up Cisco's number and say, I'm going to call you back at this number. Can you make sure I'm routed back to you? Simple example, it's just a good way to make sure that you are talking to the person that you should be talking to, not someone trying to get into your network, be it at home or in business. And at the end of the day, if you're still not sure, confirm with someone. I always train, when I do these trainings, I always tell people to go to your manager or go to IT. Generally, one of the two will have an idea of who's actually supposed to be helping either over the phone or email or what have you. So when in doubt, ask someone else. What else can you do? We kind of touched on this. Norm touched on this a little bit. Patching your systems. I will tell you, is anybody familiar with that WannaCry outbreak? WannaCry? Yes, seeing a lot of head nods. So a majority of that outbreak, that ransomware, was actually a patch was made available to stop that kind of attack 2 months before it happened. So patching is actually still a very real solution to stopping the low-hanging fruit, that easy stuff. It doesn't take much effort, hopefully. And it's important to remember not only to patch your Windows systems or your OS or whatever you're using, but those third-party applications. I use, if you've got a bad version of Adobe or an old version of Adobe, you can get remote access even if you're running Windows 10. So it's important to make sure you patch your Java, your Adobe, and all those other third-party applications that you have. Use antivirus. This, again, it's tried and true. It's becoming a little less effective nowadays because the threat landscape is changing so rapidly. But you know what? If you don't have antivirus, you're not catching that easy stuff. It'll stop most things. The stuff that's going to be prevalent, the stuff that's old, definitely worth investing in a good antivirus solution. And where possible, enabling firewalls. Firewalls either at the network level or even at your host level will stop a lot of bad traffic from getting in as well as getting out if configured properly. So let's talk about some more business-aimed tactics. Has everybody heard of the layered security approach-ish? Okay. So layered security is the idea that you get enough controls in place that it will, hopefully, if one control fails, the other will protect you still. And I have, I put up the basics of the NIST cybersecurity framework. This is a great framework. Basically the baseline for government security, so on and so forth. And if you haven't looked at this, I would definitely recommend it. But let's step through. So identify, first step of the cybersecurity framework. Identify means, understanding what your risks are to the systems that you have, knowing what systems you have, and knowing where your data is. Because if you don't know those things, you can't protect it. If you don't know where your critical data is, you don't know where you need to encrypt it or put more protections on it. If you don't know what systems you have, you don't know if that PC that's sitting over here is actually a valid PC or if it's a rogue device. So identify is definitely a great first step when incorporating a layered security approach and just making sure you have approved system inventories and so on and so forth and knowing where stuff is. Protect. Again, developing the appropriate safeguards to ensure that your services aren't affected due to virus or what have you. What that looks like is access control. usernames and passwords for each individual employee. I know having shared passwords is so convenient, but I promise you will be so much happier if you have individual ones. Security awareness training for your staff, protecting them against phishing, making sure they know how to make strong passwords, making sure they understand what your policies are and what your acceptable use policies are, for example. And making sure you develop, if you're smaller, I typically recommend just going with the administrative controls, developing your processes and procedures, and making sure people understand that, no, you can't just browse Facebook during your lunch break. That's how we get viruses. I think that's a great tactic to take if you're a smaller business. And then detect, this one's pretty straight, self-explanatory. That could mean detecting bad events. That could mean detecting a user trying to go and log in as someone else. Whatever that looks like and whatever's applicable, it's important to be able to detect those events to be able to get ahead of it before it becomes a problem. Respond. Of course, if you do detect an event, you need to respond to it. That might mean having an incident response plan where you have certain scenarios, say, a rogue employee walked off with a computer. Well, how are you going to respond to that? Well, you'll probably track down the employee, validate that that computer was encrypted and they can't steal the data off of it, so on and so forth. Having a plan that steps through those types of scenarios is a great way to get ahead of it, and actually it tends to cost less. The more time you spend on these kinds of things, the more money you're going to spend, right? And then recover, the last one here. So if something does happen, something critical gets taken down, how are you going to recover? That's where business continuity planning comes in, disaster recovery planning comes in, making sure you're prepared and ready if anywhere from a server just crashes and dies to your building burns down, being able to respond and recover from that event and continue to carry on your business. So as far as, I think this is an important topic to hit because sometimes this gets passed over, IT staffing and capabilities. I wanted to identify between in-sourced and outsourced employees just because I think it's important to make that clarification. You can have a mix of both, of course, but in general, if you have in-sourced employees for your IT and information security, you want to aim for those experts. Nowadays, that general IT guy, he's not going to know exactly what you need or what regulations you need to follow in order to be compliant. And you want to make sure that they are familiar with frameworks, security frameworks, certifications, they're continuing their educations, they're staying up to date with the latest and greatest that's in technology. And of course, with outsourced, you kind of get that pool of experts you can tap into, which is always great. Typically, if it's a tech-focused company, they're going to have a more focused training plan and so on and so forth. All right. Cybersecurity insurance. How many of you have looked into this? Isn't it kind of crazy what that looks like nowadays? Really briefly here, because I think we're getting close to time. It's really important to ensure that your cybersecurity insurance has the proper coverage and you understand what's covered. I've seen scenarios where cybersecurity an incident happened and an organization was unable to use their insurance because they had not fulfilled one of the requirements. Gosh, that sucks. It's also important to understand that cybersecurity insurance is a risk management strategy, right? You're transferring that financial risk to your insurer. So it's not an all-in-one solution. It's not going to protect you from everything. But it can cover, things such as liability and costs of an investigation if there isn't a reason for one, which if you're not familiar, investigations, if you're coming in on emergency rates, it's gonna jump up. It's gonna get expensive quick. And sometimes you have to investigate and you have to deal with it. Reviewing periodically is also important as your company grows, your organization grows, making sure your cybersecurity insurance still aligns with where you're going and what you have. New risks are being introduced into environments every day. So it's important just to periodically ensure that you're still covered and have everything in check. I believe this is my last one, so bear with me. Breach notifications. This is probably the scenario you don't want to be into, but you need to know about. With breach notifications, really quickly, I'm not a lawyer or an attorney, so please take this with a grain of salt and just Talk with your legal counsel if you got them about what you need to match to ensure that you're properly covered. But it is important that you understand the laws and understand the regulations you must adhere to. For example, Washington State, I just looked this up. Did you know upon the discovery or reasonable belief of a breach that you have to notify the state immediately? Yeah, it's on their website. I went and found that. I found that very interesting. Is you hear about breaches all the time, but you never hear about how they have to notify. And that could mean that even a first and last name and a social security number was compromised. You have to notify. Some common regulations that also have notification requirements. HIPAA, basically, if you've been breached as a healthcare organization, you have PHI data, patient information, you have to report no later than 60 days after a confirmed breach. So you have 60 days to get your investigation in, get your reports out, and figure out what your next steps are in order to remediate, and then report that up to them. PCI is a great one here. That's mostly retailer focused. If you are a PCI, if you're taking credit cards and you are breached, you have to notify Visa, Amex, Discovery immediately following a confirmed breach. MasterCard gives you 24 hours, which is kind of nice, but really doesn't make much of a difference in my opinion. And honestly, if you do get breached and the PCI council is made aware, you may have to bring in a very special PCI forensics investigator, which again can shoot up some costs of investigation. And finally, knowing how to report. There is, unfortunately, unless you're going through someone to do this for you, there is no one location where you just report everything. You might have to remote report to multiple parties, state, federal regulations. You might have to provide forensics reports. You might have to provide information on those affected. So again, it's important to engage with your legal counsel to understand and know what you are responsible for in situations like this to ensure that you're covering all of your bases.